Good afternoon or good morning. My name is Jeff Cram from iSight Design, and welcome to Wrangling Global Content Strategy. We're excited to have everybody on the webinar today. We have a great group of folks that signed up, and I see folks still rolling in, so welcome to the webinar. Before we get started, a few things. We have a hashtag, so hash global content. If you want to play along at home and tweet, we'll have folks listening and watching for questions. And if you want to be engaged socially, you can use that hashtag. So please do. But we're excited to have you all here. This is a topic that is near and dear to us, and I know a lot of you. Looking at the folks that registered for the webinar, we have a really wide group of folks, diverse organizations from very large global organizations to consultants and agencies, all with the common thread of caring about how to wrangle global content, how to put together great customer experiences for a global audience. So let's jump right in. So before we get going, I want to say a few things. And Brian, mouse wasn't quite working there. A lot of work has gone into organizing this webinar, and I want to highlight the four companies that have really brought this forward. As I mentioned, I'm Jeff from iSight Design. We're a digital agency and integrator and work on large-scale global projects from an experience strategy perspective and CMS and platform perspective. But with us, we're three other companies that are all parts of this ecosystem, most of which are probably familiar to you if you work inside the global space. Lionbridge, which is a very large translation services company, Sitecore, which has a huge global footprint and is a leader in the web content management space, and Clay Tablet, which really serves as kind of a middle piece between the CMS and your translation service provider as an integration point to really help make really complex parts of this technical ecosystem work together. They've been a great partner of ours, and we're pleased to have all of their support for this webinar. We have some great speakers today. I'll be moderating and providing some of the introduction and kind of why this matters, but I want to take the opportunity to introduce two other folks that are on the line with us today. You may be familiar with them already. Seth Gottlieb, who is at Lionbridge, and before that has had a long history in the content management space. He has been a longtime advocate for just getting CMS right and is a really independent, pragmatic thinker. And we're really fortunate to have Seth be on this webinar. So welcome, Seth. And
Thank you.
Brian Payne, who is my colleague in Oregon. And Brian leads up our technology group. I'm getting a little bit of feedback on the mic if someone changes settings. Brian heads up our technology group in Oregon and oversees some of our largest, most complex CMS engagements. So they'll be delivering the majority of the presentation, and let's get started. So here's our agenda. We're going to start out with looking at why global content strategy matters. Why are we all here today? And then I'm going to turn it over to Brian and Seth, and we're going to talk about the catalysts and trends that really are impacting why this is even more relevant right now, because things have been changing so quickly that things that were true a year or 2 years ago are very different now, right? So what we're going to then get into is the keys to wrangling global content. So we've organized them into 5 keys for you, and Brian and Seth are going to go through some real world case studies and examples of how organizations are adopting global content management best practices and looking at this whole space of content strategy. We'll have a Q&A at the end, but I want to encourage you, if you're not familiar with the GoToMeeting interface, there's a question section on your bar that should pop up next to this. As we go through, please do type in questions, either in that question section or socially on Twitter. We'll be watching them. We'll try to address them as we go midway through, but at the end, if we have time, we'll pick off a few of them, and if we don't, we will address them directly via email after. So do use the questions as we go through. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So why does this all matter? Why are we all here today? And why is global content strategy something that's important? And when we think about this topic, one of the things that we know is true as practitioners and that people that work on the web inside large global companies is that we're really good at making websites, right? But we're not so good at managing them. And this is a picture of the car I have at home, or it's symbolic of a website that may have seen its better years. But related to that is this idea that large global organizations especially make a lot of websites. And so we have this issue of having this digital sprawl and ecosystem out there, which is always accumulating over time. And over time, it's harder and harder to manage that because you're both thinking about the new stuff that you're working on, but you're also have this legacy heritage of all the content, all these diverse stakeholders, all trying to do their best job for their customers, but not always doing so in a coordinated way and not always thinking about what's required after the fact. This is just especially true in global organizations and something that's really unique to the world we live in. So what we want to do getting going is do a few quick polls and just to see both who's on the line and what you are all thinking. And the first one we want to do is just get an idea of the size and scope of your current environment. So if you're on the brand side, kind of add up the country websites and languages, and you can do the math however you think is right for your organization. But how many country websites and languages does your organization support? If you're on the agency or consultancy side, think of a typical client or organization that you might work with. And I'll put the poll up here for a few seconds. Go ahead and go right into the interface, and you can just click on one of the following from 1 to 5, from 5 to 10, from 10 to 15, or 15 plus. Go ahead and submit that. We'll leave it open for about 30 seconds here. See a lot of results already coming in. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll here, and let's look at what happened. So looks like for the folks at least on the call today, it's really a mix, right? We've got some that are in the 1 to 5, but a large percentage of folks are managing really large platforms, right? 15 plus country websites and languages. And I'm sure you're all kind of empathetic to the idea that that's challenging. And increasingly, this is the mandate that we're seeing from our clients, and this is what we're being asked to do, which is really unify what had historically been a very decentralized and fragmented environment and bring together a lot of these in-country or local sites and languages into a more unified experience. One of my favorite stories from our interactions with clients comes years back. We had the privilege of working with a very large global organization for many, many years. And one of the stakeholders we worked with inside this organization, he got promoted into the role of VP of Global Web. This was a brand new position for him. He had huge responsibility, but he also had huge vision. He had ideas of how he was going to come in and take this kind of stodgy old company and reshape it from a digital perspective, bring in better customer experience, unify the content, increase sales. But when he took over the reins of the operation, he realized immediately that he had not only the new stuff he wanted to do, but the existing environment that was already there. You know, all the years of accumulation of all the sites that have built up. So the first thing he did is an inventory. He said, how many websites do I have? Where are they? How are they distributed? How are people using them right now? And what he found when he added them all up was, by his estimation, there were more than 10,000 different websites in this organization. And I'll just let that sink in for a moment. Some of you may have organizations bigger than that, but 10,000 different websites. This isn't an actual sitemap of his, it's just representation. But what he realized was there's no possible way that he could ever take care of this, right? So what he did, and he had a pretty unique solution to this, instead of going around and trying to find all the stakeholders and track it all down, he said, you know what, I've got a different idea. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the plug on the servers. I'm going to shut all the ones down that we don't know about. They had log files and they're looking at activity. He said, I'm only going to turn them back on if someone notices. I'm only going to turn them back on if an internal stakeholder says, hey, where's my site? We needed that. Or customer comes and says, hey, where's this site? And while that's not a pragmatic solution for a lot of organizations, it almost is a necessity sometimes when you have such a large, sprawling organization that has accumulated so much content that isn't being actively managed. And so what we really want to talk about today is, how do you not get to the point where you have to break into the server room and pull the plugs on the servers, but how do you get to the point where you have control over this overall experience and you have a plan, processes, people, and the technology in place to actually make this happen. Forrester has some really good research on customer experience, and I won't spend too much time on this, but for all of us that work in these large global organizations, we know that we're working hard to produce the content and the information architecture and the design and the marketing messages to all create this experience for our customers. And it's a lot of work. But from a customer perspective up there in the orange, this is an increasingly fragmented space, right? We know that the channels are exploding. We know that the devices are exploding. And we know that it doesn't matter for a customer because they expect to be able to get the right experience at the right time. And we have to deal with that spider web of complexity that's in between. What's interesting is when you look at this from a global perspective, is that it's exponentially more complicated, right? Because if you're looking at it on a country by country basis, or a site by site basis, or an owner by owner basis, they're often managing their own spider webs, and these aren't necessarily coordinated. And you don't have a unified view of the customer. You don't have a single customer record, and you aren't able to easily deliver the experiences that you need to deliver to your customers. So what we're going to talk about today is how do we make that happen, and what are we seeing from organizations that are actually achieving this. One of the things we're seeing that's an exciting new trend, and I'm sure a lot of you are already on this, is this idea of content strategy. And it's been a huge movement that's taken over the last 3 to 4 years, especially. Yesterday in Minneapolis, Confab, one of the leading content strategy conferences, just wrapped up, where a lot of these practitioners were convening. But this idea of content strategy and really decoupling the idea of the management of the content as your business asset from the technology, from the channel, and thinking about it as a strategic asset in itself, and having people and processes around your content that are independent. And Sarah Wachter-Bachter, who wrote a fantastic book this last year called Content Everywhere, speaks to this, and she advocates that content strategy is really that discipline that bridges that gap between that vision that you have of how the experience will work and that execution that you need to have in defining how content's going to serve your organization over time. And what we're seeing is, the smart organizations are getting really organized about the way that they think and manage their content, and ultimately the way that that funnels into their technology strategy, their localization strategy, and everything through. So this is going to be a common theme as Seth and Brian talked throughout this presentation, of how content strategy kind of be amplified and enabled by all the other things you have to think about. But we want to make sure, especially as you have questions going through or your own experiences, we love to hear from you in terms of how specifically you're handling content strategy on the global scale. So before I turn it over to Seth and Brian, one more poll. I promise this is the last one that we're going to do the hand raising on. And we're not going to be harsh here, but what we want to know is, going into this, as you think about how your organization is currently handling the idea of global content strategy, how would you grade yourself? And I'm going to throw the poll question up here. Of course, for this webinar, we're all friends here. There are no flunking grades. So this is between A, B, C, or D. And what we want to ask you to do, the same thing that you did before, go ahead and just say, A, you feel really good. You've got a solid strategy in place, and you've got good ongoing execution of it. It may not be perfect, A+, but you're on top of it. B, you've done a lot of thinking on the planning, but there are pretty significant gaps on the execution. C, strategy could use a little tightening up, and frankly, the execution's not there, but there could be pockets of great stuff happening. And D, there's no global content strategy in place. Folks aren't even aware of maybe what that's needed. There's a lot of work necessary inside your organization. And again, if you're on the agency or consultancy side, just kind of project what you're seeing as the maturity of a typical brand that is coming in and starting to work with you. All right, so I'm going to close the poll here. And before I show the results, think to yourself, how many people do you think gave themselves A's? What percentage? Just make a mental estimate, and here we go. Nobody gave yourself an A. Come on. I know there's some great brands doing some great stuff on there, but here's the thing. It's really distributed, almost perfectly evenly, amazingly enough, between the B, C's, and D's. This is pretty similar to what we're seeing as well. And I think what this says, even though there are no A's, what this really gets at is that confidence gap, right? There's a really large gap in terms of what you think you should be doing and what the demands are from your customers to what you're actually doing, because you may not have enough resources, you you just may not be able to keep up with the pace of change. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And what I'm going to do now is introduce Seth and Brian, and they're going to walk through the next part of this webinar. So without further ado, Seth, take it away.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Those are two very interesting polls. The two takeaways that I got is, well, actually, the big takeaway is that we have the right audience here because everybody feels like they could be doing better with their content strategy. And also, we have a nice distribution of people that are just getting started with localization, and also companies that are probably, they're supporting a lot of languages right now, and they're probably feeling a lot of pain and stress to support those languages at the level that they want to support them. So this section here, in this section here, Brian and I are going to talk about, well, how we got here and why global content strategy is so important. And Jeff set us up nicely, but I'll start with talking about just historically a little bit. I've been in content management for a really long time, back when even like major corporate websites were put together by these tiny marketing teams. And at first, localization wasn't even on the radar screen. You were just struggling with getting your website up to some degree, and if you did that, you were really happy. And then a little while later, localization became a topic. And for a long, long time, localization was one of those requirements that were nice to have. Initially, it was something that was stated as a requirement in a content management system, a requirement in a CMS implementation. But sooner or later, localization kind of fell off and was scoped out of the project. In my experience, it's a lot like mobile, where mobile localization was always just around the corner, always on the horizon, but it took a really, really long time to get to the point where it was a business imperative. And then all of a sudden, bam, and everybody's clamoring for expanding their global reach. And this has been particularly embarrassing for marketers, because when marketers have asked for budget to implement a new content management system or to improve the website, global reach was a really important part of that justification. And now when the business comes back and says we have to get into this market or that market, the marketers are in an embarrassing position of not being prepared. So the reason why the business is asking for expanding into new markets is pretty obvious. We've had a number of years of really slow economic growth, high unemployment, and really the only way to expand your business or even sustain the size that it is now is to widen the net, to reach new customer bases, new audiences, and start marketing to them. And most of the opportunity is in the non-English speaking markets. So if there have been a number of studies recently where they're predicting what is going to be the dominant language on the internet, and Chinese is predicted to be in 2014, if not already, the dominant language in the internet. And this is a graph put together by a company called Smartling, that shows over time the different percentage of language speakers on the internet. So Chinese is a really, really important area of audience to be publishing to. There's also other languages that have had just explosive growth over the last 10 years. Arabic, 2,500% increase, Russian, 1,800% increase, Chinese, 1,400% increase, Portuguese, almost 1,000% increase over the last 10 years of internet adoption. And just, obviously the biggest growth there is in Brazil. And then closer to home, if you're just marketing to a US market, the last couple elections have shown us that Hispanic populations are becoming larger and increasingly important to our economy and to our political system. And there have been a few estimates that target Hispanics by 2030 to be around 21, to 25% of the U.S. population. So that's a considerable audience or considerable customer base that would be really a shame to leave out. And the other aspect of this is the trend is obviously going to continue, because even with the growth rates that we've seen today, we're still just scratching the surface of the overall adoption of these by these populations. So Asia, Africa, South America, their internet penetration is still very, very low as a proportion of their population. In the US, we've kind of almost reached a saturation point. So with that, I'm going to have Brian talk about the Unified Experience Mandate.
Jeff mentioned the user experience imperative that we're seeing is an emerging trend, and really a key catalyst is we look at execution around global content strategy. The digital ecosystem is becoming increasingly complex. There's a variety of touch points, and frankly, most organizations are really engaging in random acts of customer engagement. You take a very simple example here of what that might look like for a German English-speaking customer. And you're seeing them perhaps go to your .com, search using English, end up on the .com version of your mobile experience, search using German, engage on a German version of your mobile app or mobile website. And it's frankly very disjointed. And one of the key catalysts that we see as part of this is really mobile. And looking at how organizations need to revisit their content strategy from the ground up. And as Jeff mentioned, how that becomes exponentially more complicated when global is factored into things.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about three trends in content management. The first one is just the ubiquity of content management, and particularly centralized content management. When I started out, content management was kind of a new thing. Oops. People were still lovingly handcrafting HTML pages one at a time, and now that is pretty much a rarity. And to show that, Lionbridge did a study about a year ago, and the study was a survey of around 1,000 marketing executives. And one of the questions on that survey was about content management system centralization. So trying to take a bunch of disparate websites, different platforms, and put them onto one platform, or to take those old static websites and manage them in a more content management way. And the respondents were that 44% of these marketing executives had come up with or had implemented a centralized content management system. Now, that's not to say that this one web content management system that's managing all their websites, but it is like the platform of record for the major websites that the organization was publishing. And an additional 12% were planning on replacing that centralized content management system. So they've been in it long enough that they want to do a phase 2 or a second iteration through. And then, other companies are in the process of doing some type of centralization. So it's pretty clear that the companies are getting to the point where they're starting to look at web content management and digital marketing in a more global sense. So and the second takeaway there is that content editing or basic page editing is largely a solved problem. We're we're not really we're beyond the point where just editing pages is something that requires a webmaster and all sorts of ceremony. You have organizations that have operationalized content updates, and they're also they're operationalizing content updates at a global scale, where they're managing multiple market websites on the same platform. So content management is a the basic page editing is a simple thing. The next level is getting to the more sophisticated operations of taking advantage of advanced functionality, and Brian's going to talk about that.
So the next trend that we're seeing is the growing maturity of marketing technology platforms. Your marketing technology platform really is going to be foundational in delivering a unified global customer experience. Marketing technology platforms are maturing and growing more and more complex at an ever-increasing pace. And we now have products like Sitecore that have matured from simply being content management systems into becoming robust, full-fledged customer engagement platforms. And the reason why this trend matters is you really aren't going to be able to completely revamp your global content strategy on the platform you have today if you answered C or D in terms of where you would grade your global content strategy. If your global content strategy is really fundamentally broken, you're most likely going to need to start over and either re-platform on the CMS you're using today and start from scratch on that, or move to a new one. And this is really a key trend, and it's important to understand that these two things need to really complement each other, the marketing technology platform that you have in place and your global content strategy.
All right. The third trend is around cycle times. Now, that survey that I mentioned earlier, another question around it was around cycle time. So cycle time is defined by the number of days that elapse from the final source language piece of content being ready and all the localized versions being translated. And so you can see that there's kind of a bimodal distribution. A lot of folks can get a translation turnaround in around 15 days. In other companies, it's as long as 60 days, which for some organizations might be very similar to never because they're working in a very time-compressed environment. Marketing is particularly that way because marketers want to have global campaigns and also marketing campaigns around product launches. So if your cycle time is 60 days, you have a problem because you can either wait on deploying your source language. So that means 60 days after finalizing your content, your audience is going to see it, and that's not very good. Or you can have a kind of rolling publishing across different markets. And if you're trying to do a global product launch, that's not very good either because you have kind of disparate access to content based on the language that the person wants to speak. So because of this, another question here is around what's important, and cycle time rated very highly among these marketing professionals. So they feel like they're constantly behind the gun and trying to catch up and moving slower than they would like to when they're doing their marketing. All right, so 3 trends. All right. So there are 5 keys that I'll be talking about here to be successful in global content strategy. And the first one is striking the balance between local relevance and global consistency. So local relevance is really about the local audience's perception that the organization is speaking to them. It's one of them. It can relate to them. So this kind of brand affiliation at the local level. And global consistency is around the unification of the brand across all these different markets. So you can recognize a Coca-Cola ad no matter where you are in the world, but every member of every market needs to feel like Coca-Cola is a brand that's really speaking to them. And as a result, we came up with this 2x2 matrix of global relevance, global consistency, and local relevance. And like any 2x2 matrix that you'll ever see, the place you want to be is on the right. And that could be kind of a challenge because in some ways the two dimensions seem to be contradicting each other. You can't be the same and also very, very specialized to every particular population. But there is a way to do that, and I'll get into that in a few minutes. But no matter how you do it, what companies are experiencing, or at least our experience of companies, is they don't go directly from the lower left to the upper right. What they usually do is they either err on one side and then eventually move up the other way. So a company might start with a very centralized global marketing program that is very, very insensitive or stale, or it seems not very relevant to all the local populations, or they go into more of a chaotic mode where all these local marketing groups have a little bit of budget and they throw together all sorts of different types of websites, and it's not until after a time where the centralized marketing organization figures out what's out there and tries to reel everybody into a standard brand. So I'll give you a couple examples. This one is for GM. GM has an official African website. It's the one on the right. It's for the South African market. And so this website is part of their global network of global websites. It's very similar to a lot of the other country websites of this tier. The one on the left is a rogue website that was put up by some Kenyan GM group. So it's not part of the local network. It was just thrown up there. I don't know if you can see the domain, but it's gm.co.ke, which is a very official corporate domain, but it looks like it's probably going to be out of the purview of the global GM brand. And when you look at a website like this, it's always difficult to say whether it's ugly to you because of your cultural bias, or if it's just just ugly to everybody. I'm told by a friend who's Kenyan that this is not appealing to him either, so I'm going to say that this is not a high quality website, no matter what your particular cultural tastes are. And in case anyone is thinking that this is a site designed for mobile, this is what it looks like on mobile. So that flash unit in the middle is not available on an iPhone at all, and you have to scroll right and left. So it was a rogue website that definitely does not look like it's of the caliber of a global brand like GM. So here's an example of going the other way. This is an older example from Microsoft. And they put out this global campaign, and they localized it to all these different languages. And this is an example of the Polish site. And the local Polish marketing group said, well, the guy in the center does not look that Polish to me. We want to have him swapped out. I don't know why the person on the left doesn't look very Polish either, but they seem to single out the guy in the middle. So there was kind of a rush job to address this, and then out of it came the one on the right, which you can see that the hand is still the skin tone of the original one. So not quite what you're trying to do when you're marketing to a local market. Now that said, this is a while ago, and Microsoft has improved quite a bit, and I've got some stuff to talk about like what you can do, and Microsoft is really leading in some of those areas. All right, So striking the balance is really hard. On the one hand, you don't want to dilute the power of your global brand. You want, if you have a global company, you want to leverage that global feel and behave like a global company. But on the other hand, you don't want to have the audience feel like you don't get them and that you're kind of an outsider trying to break in. To be successful, what you need to do is, first of all, in your global branding strategy, you need to come up with a brand that is neutral enough so that it doesn't turn anybody off. So, thinking about colors and thinking about, just core brand attributes, you want to make sure that the core of your brand, the part that's global, is not going to exclude any market that you're interested in doing business in. And then the second element of this is you need to come up with areas within your marketing program or within your creative assets that you will accept tinkering with in order to adapt to that local market. So, for example, when you have imagery, and this is probably the biggest thing that we run across is, a marketing agency will put together a marketing program and have all this imagery. Well, that imagery might not be that relevant to the local markets that you're publishing to. So one of the things that you can do is, when you create these local marketing campaigns or the global marketing campaigns, you can give options or different image options that can be plugged into the marketing asset, so that the local market says like, we don't want to have this family a picture of this family sitting on a couch. We'd rather have this, which is more neutral, or certain pictures of people or stock photography. If you plan that in at the beginning of your creative process, downstream you'll do a lot less damage control. And that really gets into the operational aspect. So coming up with thinking about localization throughout your marketing process, from the planning process to the creative process, the operations of localizing that content, to review that content, and also publishing it in a way that it's accessible and findable by all those different audiences. So that seems easy, the way I said it in the simple seesaw type of graphic, but it's a lot easier said than done. And what Jeff was talking about earlier is this kind of channel language proliferation. You have this Cartesian product, so you have all these devices that you need to support and these different channels that you're communicating through. And then if you take all that, which is hard enough, and then you multiply by all the locales that you're supporting, that's like absolute insanity. And the problem is that every time you add a device, a channel, or a locale, you're multiplying your problems by one more, or one more number. And then when you add personalization on top of that, you've just achieved a level of chaos, because at that point, you're dealing with the practically infinite number of permutations that you could have when you put your personalization logic in there. So things like greetings, do you use the first name or the last name, or things like suggested content or recommendations, where you say related content. Well, you just have to make sure that you're presenting related content in a language that the person can speak. And also, if you don't have any localized content, you need to address that. So it can be a pretty challenging task, and it's pretty overwhelming to start with. And I think that that's probably where a lot of this audience is experiencing right now, and that's why you're all attending this webinar. All right, so our solution to that is to prioritize your markets with tiers. And like any really hard and complex problem, it gets easier when you break it down. So we have this tiering model that we use a lot at Lionbridge, and what we do is we break down the overall market into groups of markets, which the tier 1 is your highest revenue. This is the markets that are the most mature in your business, or the ones that you're doing the most business in now. Your tier 2 are your fastest growing markets. So these are markets that have either demonstrated a high opportunity factor, because you have a lot of customers there that would be interested in the types of products that you're selling, or maybe the demographics are just hitting the right point where they have enough disposable income to buy your products, or perhaps it's just been organic. You've just been noticing some business from those markets, and without you even trying. So you're seeing, well, these markets could be really high potential if we put a little investment into them. And the third tier is kind of the long tail, everybody else. Now, strategically speaking, tier 1 and tier 3 are pretty easy to approach. Obviously, you want to do a worthy marketing effort on your tier 1. You're already doing that because tier 1 includes your home market. And in tier 3, what you're trying to do is support those markets with a bare, to your brand standards. So you don't want to have any GM Kenya website. You want to kind of keep it to a certain level of standard that reflects your brand, but you want to do it as cheaply as you can. And the important thing about tier 3 is that if you do it right, some of those tier 3s are going to graduate into tier 2s because you're going to have a market presence, and you're going to find that customers are interested in buying your products. So tier 2 is a challenge because tier 2 represents a transition. These are new markets that you're entering that are doing well. You don't want to invest too quickly or move in a sloppy type of way and potentially hurt growth. So this is tier 2 is where you see most companies making mistakes. So that example of Microsoft, Poland was probably a tier 2 for them. So they realized that they wanted to aggressively market to Poland, but they really didn't have a good read on what was happening over there, or what people are looking for in marketing materials. And then if you're successful with tier 2, they become your next tier 1s. So tier 2 requires very diligent attention, looking at analytics, investing properly, and also being careful not to embarrass yourself. All right. So next, we're going to be talking about aligning content architecture and market tiers.
The third key we see to wrangling your global content strategy is aligning your architecture to the market tiers that Seth discussed earlier. When I think of content architecture, I view that as the data model, really, that underpins your content strategy. And I see 4 key components to your content architecture. The first being site structure, the second, content structure, the third, content types, and the last one that's often overlooked is content relationships and how content is linked to each other. So when we look at site structure for an effective global content strategy, you've got 2 options at the very highest level. You can craft a multilingual site, and you can have various content items. Each one of those can have individual language versions underneath those. Or you can have a multi-site approach in combination with support for multiple languages. And thinking through, really at the outset of planning a CMS implementation, what your site structure is going to be like, not only for phase 1, but for phase 2, for phase 3, is critically important. So you may not be rolling all of your tier 1 sites at once. You might not be moving your tier 3 sites to the new CMS platform immediately. But it's important to look at least at a high level what the requirements for those sites will be like as you consider the site structure. The next item is content structure, and there's 4 keys that we see for content structure. The first one is fairly obvious. It's efficient language management. And what's important there is, on the slide I showed earlier, that you have the ability to manage a single variant languages. So you have streamlined information architecture. So what I mean by that is instead of having a separate variant of the content structure for each language, you've got a single content tree. That is very important for efficient language management. The next one is planning for language fallback. So if you don't have content translated into a local language version, how are you going to handle that? Are you going to fall back to a source language? For instance, if you don't have content in Spanish or German, are you going to fall back to English? And thinking through the corner cases for planning for language fallback at the outset is very important. Another item that we see often overlooked around content structure is planning for media library localization or how digital assets are going to be handled. A lot of times when we're thinking about planning for content structure, we think about content. But we don't necessarily think about how a media library would be structured to support localized sites. And that's an important consideration. So much like you're going to be localizing content, you're going to be localizing media and other digital assets, and it's important to consider how that's going to be handled. And the last item here is language versioning and permissions. And it's important to use a content management system that supports discrete versioning of languages and also gives you granular control over how permissioning is handled within the content structure and who has the ability to change what and edit what and move items through workflow. Another consideration here when we look at content architecture is content types. Having structured content types that are broken down into discrete parts versus a single page content type where you have most of the information stored in a single field is hugely important. By using structured content and enabling reuse of that content, the costs associated with content development and localization can really be significantly lowered. It's a major point that is often overlooked. It's especially overlooked if you don't have a really solid global content strategy today in place, and you maybe have a .com that you're going to be translating into a bunch of different local languages, and that .com doesn't have well-structured content. We see a lot of organizations taking their .com site that doesn't have atomically structured content and simply translating that out, and that's a big miss. And then the last building block we see here when you're looking at your content architecture is the relationship between content items. And not all CMSs are created equal in this regard. So if you can see that the diagram there showing the linkage between content item 1 in the language master site and content item 1 in the localized site, number 2, that's an important consideration. So if you move beyond just having a multilingual site or individual localized sites and start thinking about the concept of having a language master where you have a primary site that maybe isn't even accessible through a domain, but it's where you're using it's what you're using to maintain all the different language versions, and then those get localized out into individual country sites. It's important that you have the ability in the content management system to maintain a linkage between those content items, so you understand if a content item in the language master changed, and it now needs to be changed in a localized site, or if somebody in a localized site has made changes to that content item, and it may need to get propagated back up to your language master. So the fourth key we see here is streamlining language management and the translation process. And the reason why this is really important is your global content strategy isn't going to be sustainable if this process isn't efficient. And if your global content strategy isn't sustainable, it's really not a strategy. In looking at tools that can help with streamlining language management in the translation process is going to be really important when you start to plan for how you can support your content strategy going forward. One such tool is Clay Tablet. Clay Tablet is an integration software vendor that plays kind of the middleman or the quarterback, if you will, between your content management system, in this case Sitecore on the left, and the translation service providers that you might be working with, or perhaps internal translation team members. And in some cases, maybe even machine translation that might be done. So when we look at something like Clay Tablet, one of the things that's really nice about it is that in conjunction with Sitecore, is that it's very well integrated within the platform. It's really seamless. This diagram here is showing what in the top left Sitecore looks like in the page editor view. And you see the Clay Tablet translation tab and the ability to send content items out to translation. When you do that, you have the chance to, the opportunity to pick what items are going to be translated into which languages. And Clay Tablet handles routing that workflow to the appropriate translation service provider. So it makes the decision for this language, should it go to an internal translation team member? Should it go to an external translation service provider like Lionbridge? Or is it appropriate to route this to machine translation for whatever reason? Another key point about how Clay Tablet allows language translation to become more streamlined and more efficient is how it's integrated within workflow in Sitecore. So it's built right in. So you know, Clay Tablet, when you first start using it, and you're doing a bulk translation, if you will, you've stood up your language master site, and now you're taking, say, your source language, which is perhaps English, and you're translating it out to 30 different languages. Clay Tablet works well, and it can help you with that initial bulk translation work. But where it really starts to shine is when you're up and running on Clay Tablet on a day-to-day basis. You have, because of its deep integration within the workflow in Sitecore, you're able to have the whole translation workflow process really be seamless for your content authors and editors. If you don't have something like Clay Tablet in place, you're really going to be in a tough spot. The alternative to do a bulk export all at once isn't going to be supportable in the long term. In most larger organizations, really aren't going to be able to give translators, especially if you're working with an external translation provider, direct access into the CMS. Another aspect of Clay Tablet that really helps to streamline the translation workflow process is that you're able to see the status of items that are out to work or out for translation right within the tool. So even though a content item might be sent out to an external translation service provider for translation, you're able to actually see where that's at in the translation workflow that's happening in that external provider's third-party translation management system. And Seth is going to talk a little bit about what to do with the long tail here.
All right. Clay Tablet is a wonderful software. It's actually, at Lionbridge, that's our go-to platform for integrating with customer content management systems. But you still do need to shuttle content back and forth through Clay Tablet in order to get your content localized. And then once the content comes back, you need to make sure that it fits in your layouts. And a lot of companies that are just getting into localizations are finding that their page layouts are incredibly brittle. So they don't allow for text expansion in verbose languages like German, which is typically, I think, 125% the length of English. So when you're trying to get into a lot of markets, you know, your long tail, you know, you might want to have 20 websites of markets that you think that there might be some opportunity. There is a different method to do that, which requires less effort to translate. But what you're doing is you're treating those websites a lot more uniformly than you would in the model where you have these different local versions of websites. And to do that, what we'll typically do is recommend a technology called a translation proxy. And what a translation proxy is, it's a software application that sits in between a single language website, such as, you know, maybe it's your primary English website, or maybe you set aside a international version of your primary website in English or in your source language. And when audiences go and visit pages through the translation proxy, the translation proxy dynamically swaps in translations so that the source language is swapped out with the target language. So in this diagram, you can see that there's a dub, dub, dub www.acme.com. If you're an English speaker, you'll go directly to that here in the orange area. And then you also have these different localized versions for French and for UK English and also for German. And those all go through the proxy, and when even though the content management system or the website is producing English pages, these audiences are seeing pages in their own language. And in addition to making it very efficient, because when you add a language, you don't have to change any of your process to publish on your local website. You also have the advantage of kind of immediately seeing what that content looks like once it's on your page, because you can view it through the proxy. You can see that perhaps those labels on the buttons don't quite fit in the squares that look like buttons. So that is an option. It's particularly good for the long tail when you're trying to get into lots of different markets, and you might want to be experimental about trying a new market, and you don't want to change any of your core publishing operations. All right, so the next one, let's see here. Okay, so Brian's going to talk about how to get from here to there.
So the last key we see is establishing a multi-year roadmap. This isn't going to happen all at once. You're not going to sort out your global content strategy problems and get from a D to C to B, or even up to an A and be the 1% that would score themselves as an A all at once. You need to really think about what a multi-year roadmap is going to look like. And we've got 4 recommendations for you. First off, avoid the big bang approach. It's just not going to work, especially for larger global organizations. If you're a smaller company and you have a smaller presence, you might be able to get there, but it's not going to happen for a larger global organization. You need to think about a phased approach, and Seth is going to talk a little bit about what that'll look like in a second. The second item is build momentum. It's really important to establish quick wins right out of the gate and to show success early on. And the third item is identifying strategic priorities, and coming back to what Seth was talking about earlier around market tiers. That's really an important consideration, is to use market tiering and that approach that Seth talked about to identify strategic priorities early on. And then lastly, and I think most of the folks that probably scored themselves a C or a D here would probably agree that you really cannot underestimate the amount of work that's going to go into this effort from a content perspective. So Seth is going to talk a little bit now about what a sample roadmap to global business might look like. Seth, I think you might be on mute.
Sorry about that. Okay. You missed a really, really great presentation. All right, so this is probably what a lot of customers are experiencing, a lot of the audience is experiencing. They're just getting started out. Perhaps they have a single language website that is designed for an EN/US audience. And they either have no localized websites, or they have a bunch of rogue websites that are just out there that they have no control over. And quite frankly, they're embarrassed to look at them, because it's kind of GeoCities type of caliber websites for a global brand. The first step to implementing this process is to try to standardize on those localized websites and really treat everybody like a tier 3, because you're just growing your global business, but what you're trying to do is raise the standard of those tier 3 types of markets. You're just getting into publishing to German and Spanish and French, and you're looking at which of those markets are starting to see responsiveness. So when you're publishing content out to them, which are getting traffic, and which of these customers are you converting. So the key theme of phase one is establishing a baseline of quality, and casting the net as wide as you can to figure out which of the markets that are going to be bringing you business. The second, or the phase two in this process, is where you start to see tier two markets emerging out of tier three. So these are markets that have demonstrated their capacity to generate revenue, and you're starting to be very conscious and aware of how these markets are doing. And then over time, you get to that third phase where you're no longer a company that just primarily does business in one country. You've identified one or two other markets that are now responsible for a decent amount of your revenue. And you've got a number of tier two markets where you're strategically investing in them, and you're continually adding tier three markets that might be interesting. But at this point, you've operationalized everything, so you can do this without adding a lot of complexity and headache. And with that, I'll advance the slide. Okay, so Jeff, take us home. We're almost done.
Great. Thank you, Seth and Brian. That was fantastic. We're right at about the hour mark here. So I would like to see if there's any questions out there. If some of you have to drop off, that's fine, but we still have a pretty good sized group on the webinar right now. So if you want to put some questions into the question section there, we'll take a few, and the ones we don't take, we will certainly get back to you directly. And again, if you have any questions, because Lionbridge, Clay Tablet, Sitecore, iSight were all kind of referenced, and some of their technologies were referenced very specifically. This wasn't meant to be a sales pitch, but we were trying to use examples. If you have questions about their technology, I know that they would be more than happy to get back to you as well. So I had one that came in, Seth, and I think this was for you. Going back to your tiering based upon revenue, there was something that came in via social, and it was a question on whether or not it was a good idea in principle, but revenue is the only as the only factor might be a little bit short-sighted. And are there other factors that you might suggest do tiering on, or are there situations where revenue isn't the only factor you look at for tiering?
Well, certainly. I mean, that breaks down into your overall business strategy. That revenue is based on the assumption that what you're trying to do is generate revenue as a business goal. You could also look at profitability if that's something that's you're focused on. But not all organizations are there for profit. So if you are perhaps a nonprofit or have some other mission, you would define your tier one as the one that you are you're getting the most traction in that mission.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. Another question that just came in, and this one's for you, Brian, is I think the idea of content architecture and content modeling really hit home. I think especially for folks that maybe didn't go through that process to begin with. And there's a question about, if I know that content architecture is very important for long-term sustainability, but I didn't do it the first time around in my implementation, what advice would you have for kind of how you might think about retrofitting kind of a content architecture on top of a platform that didn't have that done very well to begin with?
Well, I think that's an especially challenging situation to be in. When I was talking about the growing maturity of marketing technology platforms, I believe I mentioned that replatforming is often the only option, especially for larger global organizations that have a fundamentally broken content architecture. It's pretty hard because your content architecture ultimately is sort of the foundation for your content strategy to jack up the platform and kind of put a new foundation in underneath it. But coming back to what Seth was talking about earlier in terms of the sample roadmap and that phased approach towards moving sites across the different tiers and up through those tiers, that would be the consideration I would look at. In some cases you can go into your existing content architecture, work with content types to become more structured and also change the site structure and change the way you've structured content. But often at the end of the day, by the time you get all that stuff done to have a really solid content architecture in place, you've more or less replatformed.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the webinar. I want to, we could do a big round of applause, but the audience is on mute, so you wouldn't hear it.